Hi, I'm Sophia. I thought Christmas meant family, warmth, and coming home. Instead, on Christmas Eve, my parents handed me a suitcase and told me never to come back. After 8 years of secretly paying for everything they owned, including the luxury retirement community they were planning to move into next month, the same retirement community I had purchased and owned for the past 3 years. But the worst part wasn't being thrown out in the snow on the holiest night of the year. It was realizing that to them, I was never their daughter. I was just their personal ATM with legs. And when I finally cut off their funding, they tried to destroy my reputation, my career, and my sanity. Little did they know, they were about to discover that their ungrateful disappointment held the keys to their entire future. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. You see, for 8 years, I had been the invisible foundation holding up their picture-perfect life in Millbrook, Connecticut. While they told everyone about their successful investment portfolio and smart financial planning, it was my paychecks, quietly covering their mortgage, their car payments, their credit card debts, and yes, even the down payment on their dream retirement home at Sunset Manor, the same property I had strategically purchased through my LLC 3 years earlier. They never knew. They thought they were dealing with some faceless corporation when they signed their lease. They bragged to their country club friends about how they'd found such a steal and how lucky they were to secure a spot in the most exclusive 55-plus community in the state. What they didn't realize was that their disappointing daughter, the one they constantly criticized for not being married, not giving them grandchildren, not living up to their impossible standards, was their landlord. I wasn't some trust fund, baby living off daddy's money. I was a 34-year-old cybersecurity consultant who had built my own company from scratch, working 80-hour weeks while my parents sipped wine and complained about how hard their retirement was going to be on their fixed income. Fixed income that I was secretly supplementing every month with transfers that they thought came from their smart investments. For 8 years, I watched them take credit for success they never earned. 8 years of family dinners where they'd lecture me about financial responsibility while I quietly picked up every check. 8 years of listening to them complain about my life choices, while I made sure they never had to choose between heating their house and eating dinner. But Christmas Eve 2024 was different. I walked into their pristine colonial house in Millbrook Heights, the house I'd been helping them pay for since 2016, carrying homemade cookies and gifts I'd spent weeks carefully selecting. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine, exactly like Christmas should. The tree sparkled in the corner, surrounded by perfectly wrapped presents that I knew I had indirectly funded through their investment returns. My father, Richard, sat in his leather recliner, the one I'd helped them finance when their old furniture was falling apart. My mother, Patricia, perched on the edge of their designer sofa, the one they'd bought after I'd quietly covered their property tax bill that year. The room felt wrong somehow, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the twinkling Christmas lights. "Sophia," my father said, not even looking up from his newspaper. "We need to talk." I should have known right then. In 34 years, no conversation that started with "we need to talk" had ever ended well in the Hartwell household. But it was Christmas Eve. Surely, even my perpetually dissatisfied parents wouldn't choose the night before Christmas to detonate whatever bomb they'd been preparing. I was wrong. My mother stood up, smoothing down her cashmere sweater, the one I'd seen her charge to a credit card that I'd been secretly paying off for months. She walked to the hallway closet and returned with a suitcase. My suitcase, the one I kept in my old bedroom for when I stayed over during holidays. "We've made a decision," she said, her voice as cold as the December wind rattling the windows. "You're 34 years old, Sophia. You have no husband, no children, no real direction in life. We're tired of watching you waste your potential, and frankly, we're tired of you treating our home like a hotel." I blinked at her, the words not quite computing. Treating their home like a hotel? I visited maybe once a month, always bringing gifts, always offering to help with anything they needed. I had never asked them for money, never brought drama to their doorstep, never given them any reason to complain about my presence. "We're starting a new chapter in our lives," my father added, finally looking up from his paper. "Moving to Sunset Manor next month, beginning our retirement properly. And we've decided it's time for you to begin your real adult life too. Somewhere else." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. They were kicking me out so they could move into the retirement home that I owned. The retirement home where they'd signed a lease agreement with Hartwell Holdings LLC, my company, named after the family they were now banishing me from. "I don't understand," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. "It's Christmas Eve." "Which is exactly why this is the perfect time for a fresh start," my mother replied, extending the suitcase handle toward me. New year, new beginning. For all of us. That's when I realized something that would haunt me for days afterward. They had planned this. They had packed my things, chosen this day, rehearsed these words. This wasn't a spontaneous decision born from holiday stress or too much eggnog. This was calculated, strategic, cruel. And they had no idea that in exactly 28 days, when they showed up at Sunset Manor with their moving truck and their dreams of a comfortable retirement, they would be moving into a property owned by the daughter. They had just discarded like yesterday's wrapping paper. The worst part? They were about to find out that the family-friendly management company they'd been dealing with wasn't nearly as understanding as the daughter they'd just thrown away. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Before I dive deeper into this Christmas nightmare that changed everything, I need to know something. What time is it where you are right now? Are you listening to this on your way to work, maybe during your lunch break? Or are you lying in bed at night wondering if your own family really has your back? Drop a comment and let me know. Because I've learned that timing matters more than we think. And sometimes the universe puts certain stories in front of us exactly when we need to hear them. I also want to know, have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you were giving everything to people who saw you as disposable? Maybe it wasn't parents. Maybe it was a partner who took your support for granted, or friends who only called when they needed something, or coworkers who claimed credit for your ideas. Because here's what I've discovered. The patterns are always the same, whether it's family, friends, or anyone else. Some people will take and take and take until you're empty, and then act shocked when you finally say no. And if you're someone who's currently in that situation, if you're the one always picking up the check, always covering for someone else's mistakes, always being the responsible one while someone else gets the credit, then this story is especially for you. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about revenge. It's about something much more powerful. It's about the moment you realize your worth isn't determined by how much you can give to people who don't appreciate you. See, for years, I thought being a good daughter meant being invisible. Being the safety net that no one had to think about because it was just always there. I thought love was measured in bank transfers and problem solving and never, ever asking for anything in return. I thought if I could just be useful enough, valuable enough, reliable enough, then maybe my parents would finally see me as something more than a disappointment. But here's the truth nobody talks about. You can't earn love through sacrifice. You can't buy belonging with your bank account. And you definitely can't fix broken people by breaking yourself. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, Sophia, maybe they had a reason. Maybe there's more to the story. And you're right, there is so much more to this story, but not in the way you might think, because over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to take you through exactly how I discovered that the parents who raised me to believe I was never good enough had been living entirely off my success while telling everyone it was their own. I'm going to tell you about the phone call I made 30 minutes after they kicked me out that changed everything. I'm going to share the moment I realized that the retirement home they were so excited to move into, the one they thought represented their independence and smart planning, was actually the property I'd purchased as an investment 3 years earlier. And I'm going to walk you through what happened when they showed up to move in and discovered that their ungrateful daughter was now their landlord. But more than that, I want to share what I learned about family, about self-worth, and about the difference between helping people you love and enabling people who are using you. Because the hardest lesson I learned that Christmas wasn't about my parents' betrayal, it was about my own. It was about how I had betrayed myself for 8 years by accepting crumbs and calling it love. If you've ever felt like you're not enough, like you have to earn your place at the table, like you have to prove your worth through what you can do rather than who you are, then I need you to hear this. You are not responsible for fixing other people's lives. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm. And you are absolutely not obligated to keep supporting people who see your kindness as weakness. This story gets dark before it gets light. There are going to be moments where you might think I went too far, where you might wonder if I could have handled things differently. And maybe I could have. But sometimes, when people show you who they really are, the kindest thing you can do, for them and for yourself, is to believe them the first time. So buckle up, because this Christmas story doesn't have the ending my parents expected. And if you're someone who's tired of being taken for granted, tired of being seen as an obligation instead of a blessing, tired of people treating your love like it's guaranteed and your boundaries like they're optional, then you're going to want to hear how this unfolds. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because stories like this, stories about standing up for yourself even when it costs you everything, these are the stories that need to be told. And trust me, by the end of this, you're going to understand why sometimes walking away from people who don't value you is the most loving thing you can do. Now, let me take you back to that Christmas Eve night in Millbrook Heights, to the moment I stood in my childhood living room holding a suitcase and realized that my entire life had been built on a lie. The suitcase felt heavier than it should have as I gripped the handle, standing in the foyer of the house at 847 Maple Ridge Drive. The same foyer where I'd taken prom pictures, where I'd nervously waited for college acceptance letters, where I'd announced my first business contract. The hardwood floors gleamed under the soft glow of the crystal chandelier, the one my mother had insisted they needed 2 Christmases ago when their old light fixture started flickering. I'd quietly transferred the money for it, just like I'd done for so many other necessities over the years. The smell hit me in waves, cinnamon bark candles burning on the mantel, the lingering aroma of Patricia's famous sugar cookies cooling. In the kitchen, the crisp scent of the Fraser fir they'd driven an hour to pick out from some boutique Christmas tree farm. Everything was perfect, orchestrated, magazine-worthy. Even the presents under the tree were wrapped in coordinating burgundy and gold paper, tied with velvet ribbons that probably cost more per yard than most people spent on entire gifts. But beneath all that manufactured Christmas magic, there was something else. Something I'd never noticed before, or maybe had trained myself not to notice. The air felt sterile, performative, like a movie set designed to look like a home but lacking any real warmth. The family photos lining the hallway, professional shots taken every few years, showed 3 people standing together but never quite touching, smiles that looked more like expressions practiced in a mirror than genuine joy. Richard sat in his burgundy leather recliner, the one positioned perfectly to command the room. At 62, he still cut an imposing figure. Silver hair always perfectly styled, posture rigid even in relaxation. His reading glasses perched on his nose as he scanned the Wall Street Journal, occasionally making small sounds of approval or disapproval at whatever financial news he was consuming. The same man who'd taught me to balance a checkbook when I was 12, who'd impressed upon me the importance of fiscal responsibility and making smart investments. The irony wasn't lost on me now. Every piece of furniture he was surrounded by, every comfort he enjoyed, was funded by the daughter he was about to discard. The leather chair, my money. The newspaper subscription, my money. The wine he'd been sipping from a crystal glass that caught the light from the Christmas tree, bought with money I'd transferred to their account just last week when Patricia mentioned they were a little tight before the holidays. Patricia moved around the room like she was performing for an invisible audience, adjusting pillow placements that didn't need adjusting, straightening picture frames that were already perfectly aligned. At 59, she'd maintained her figure through twice-weekly Pilates classes and monthly spa treatments, both of which appeared mysteriously in their budget, despite Richard's frequent complaints about their fixed income. Her highlighted, blonde hair was swept into an elegant updo, and she wore a cashmere sweater set in deep emerald green that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. She'd always been beautiful, my mother. The kind of woman who drew compliments from strangers and envious glances from other women at charity events. But tonight, watching her fuss over decorations while delivering life-altering news with the emotional investment of someone discussing the weather, I saw something I'd missed before. Her beauty was as carefully constructed as this room, maintained at great expense, designed for maximum impact, but hollow at its core. The living room itself told the story of 8 years of secret subsidies. The silk drapes that they'd saved up for after I'd quietly covered a major car repair. The Persian rug that had been a lucky find shortly after I'd helped them avoid foreclosure during Richard's brief unemployment. The entertainment center that housed a television larger than most movie screens, purchased during what they called their good investment year, the same year I'd started my cybersecurity consulting firm and begun funneling serious money into their accounts. Christmas decorations covered every surface with the kind of abundance that spoke to unlimited disposable income. Hand-blown glass ornaments from European artisans. Garland that was clearly fresh, not the artificial kind most families recycled year after year. A nativity scene carved from what looked like genuine ivory. Even the Christmas stockings hanging from the mantel were custom-made, embroidered with our names in gold thread. 3 stockings. Mine hung there between Richard and Patricia's, stuffed with the same care as theirs, as if nothing was about to change. As if in an hour, we'd be sitting around this tree opening presents and pretending we were a normal, loving family. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. They'd decorated for a family Christmas while planning to destroy the family. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, snow had begun to fall in fat, lazy flakes that caught the light from the street lamps, lining Maple Ridge Drive. Millbrook Heights was the kind of neighborhood where every house tried to outdo the others with elaborate holiday displays. The Hendersons next door had synchronized their lights to music. The Watsons across the street had hired professionals to create a winter wonderland complete with life-sized reindeer. Competition disguised as celebration, just like everything else in this community. But the snow also made everything quieter, muffled, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking away the seconds, another family heirloom they'd acquired during my years of financial support. Each tick felt like a countdown to something irreversible. The Christmas tree dominated the corner of the room, at least 9 feet tall and perfectly shaped. Patricia had insisted on hiring decorators again this year, just like she had for the past 3 years. Professional ornament placement, they called it. Because apparently, even decorating a Christmas tree required expertise that regular families couldn't be trusted to possess. Under that tree sat dozens of wrapped presents. I knew without looking that most of them were expensive. Patricia had a talent for finding perfect gifts that cost hundreds of dollars each. Gifts that would be purchased with money I'd provided, given by parents who were about to throw me away like wrapping paper after Christmas morning. The fireplace crackled, with what was undoubtedly seasoned hardwood from some premium supplier. Even their firewood was an upgrade from what normal families used. The mantel above it held their Christmas cards, dozens of them from friends and neighbors, all featuring happy families in matching outfits, all testifying to the wonderful lives everyone was living. But I noticed something I'd never seen before. There wasn't a single card from anyone who actually knew our family well. They were all from country club acquaintances, business associates, neighbors who waved politely but never got close enough to see behind the facade. Richard and Patricia had spent so much energy maintaining their image that they'd forgotten to cultivate genuine relationships. Standing in that picture-perfect room, holding a suitcase I hadn't packed, surrounded by luxury I'd unknowingly funded, I felt like I was seeing my childhood home for the first time. Not as the daughter who'd grown up here, but as a stranger walking into an elaborate stage set. Everything was beautiful, expensive, and completely empty of actual love. The ticking of that grandfather clock grew louder, marking time until the moment when everything I thought I knew about my family would shatter like one of those hand-blown ornaments if it hit the hardwood floor. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire ready to snap. I stood there, suitcase in hand, watching my parents avoid eye contact like guilty children caught in a lie. But they weren't children, and this wasn't a simple mistake. This was calculated cruelty wrapped in a bow of self-righteousness. "I need you to explain this to me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You're kicking me out on Christmas Eve because I treat your home like a hotel? When exactly have I ever done that?" Patricia's perfectly manicured fingers twisted the fabric of her cashmere sweater. "Sophia, it's not about any one thing. It's about your overall attitude." "My attitude?" The word came out sharper than I intended. What attitude would that be exactly? Richard folded his newspaper with deliberate precision, the crisp pages crackling in the silence. The attitude of someone who thinks the world owes her something. You're 34 years old, unmarried, no children, running around playing businesswoman instead of settling down like a normal person. The words hit like physical blows. Playing businesswoman. As if the cybersecurity firm I'd built from nothing was some kind of elaborate game. As if the contracts I'd landed with Fortune 500 companies were make-believe. As if the money I'd been quietly funneling into their accounts for 8 years was monopoly money. "Playing businesswoman?" I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Is that what you call it when I landed the Henderson Industries contract last month? The one worth 6 figures? Was I playing businesswoman when I testified before Congress about cybersecurity threats? When Forbes featured my company in their Women to Watch article?" Patricia waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away an annoying fly. "All of that career nonsense is fine, dear. But what about your real responsibilities? What about marriage, children, building an actual life instead of just working all the time?" The hypocrisy was breathtaking. They were criticizing me for the very work ethic that had funded their comfortable lifestyle. The long hours, the weekend projects, the constant hustle that had built my company, all of it had been silently supporting their retirement dreams while they sat in judgment of my choices. "Real responsibilities," I echoed. "Like what, exactly? Like making sure your mortgage gets paid every month? Like covering your property taxes when they come due? Like paying for your car insurance, your health insurance premiums, your credit, card bills?" The color drained from Patricia's face. Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Bingo. I don't know what you're implying," Richard said, but his voice had lost its commanding edge. "We've never asked you for money." That was technically true. They'd never asked. They'd simply created crises that required solving, then accepted my solutions as if they were entitled to them. A health scare that needed expensive treatment. A roof that needed emergency repairs. An investment that went bad and left them short on the mortgage payment. Always something, and always with just enough panic in their voices to make me feel guilty if I didn't step in immediately. "You're right," I said, setting the suitcase down with a deliberate thud. You never asked. You just created situations where I had no choice but to offer. I walked to the entertainment center and picked up the framed photo of them at the country club's annual charity gala, the one where they'd won the award for philanthropic excellence after making a donation. I'd quietly funded. Remember this night? I asked, holding up the photo. You were so proud of this award. Patricia, you spent 20 minutes at dinner telling me about the standing ovation you received for your generous contribution to the children's hospital. Patricia's face had gone from pale to gray. That's different. That was our money. Was it? I pulled out my phone, fingers flying across the screen. Because I have the bank records right here. On September 15th, you called me crying about how the market crash had wiped out your savings. September 20th, I transferred $15,000 to your checking account. September 22nd, you made that same $15,000 donation to the children's hospital. The grandfather clock chimed 9 times, each note hanging in the air like an accusation. Richard had gone completely still, his newspaper forgotten in his lap. October, I continued, my voice gaining strength with each revelation. The furnace died. You needed $5,000 for a new one immediately or you'd freeze to death. I wired the money the same day. November, the Lexus needed a new transmission. Another $4,000. 3 weeks ago, Patricia, you mentioned you were stressed about Christmas expenses and didn't know how you'd afford the gifts you wanted to give. I transferred $3,000 to help with the holidays. Patricia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. We never asked for any of that. You never had to ask. The words exploded out of me with 8 years of suppressed frustration. You just called with your problems and let me fix them. Every single time. And then you'd turn around and take credit for the solutions like they came from your own brilliance. Richard finally spoke, his voice cold and measured. If you felt so put upon, you should have said no. The simple cruelty of that statement took my breath away. He was right, and we all knew it. I should have said no. I should have set boundaries. I should have let them figure out their own problems instead of enabling their lifestyle. But I hadn't, because I'd been desperate for their approval, their acknowledgement, their love. You're absolutely right, I said quietly. I should have said no. 8 years ago, when you first asked for help, I should have said no. But I didn't because I thought that if I could just help enough, be useful enough, valuable enough, maybe you'd finally see me as something more than a disappointment. Patricia's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration, of being caught, of having their comfortable arrangement threatened. We've always been proud of you, Sophia. This is about your future, not ours. Future? I laughed, the sound bitter and harsh in the Christmas-scented air. You're worried about my future while you're busy spending it. Do you have any idea how much money I've given you over the years? Any idea at all? The silence that followed was deafening. I didn't think so, I said. Shall I tell you? $47,836. That's the total of direct transfers I've made to your accounts over the past 8 years. That doesn't include the mortgage payments I've covered, the insurance premiums, the repairs, the medical bills. If we're counting everything, we're looking at well over $100,000. Patricia sank back into her chair as if the numbers had physical weight. Richard's face had turned the color of ash. But here's the really beautiful part. I continued, my voice gaining momentum. That money you're so excited about for your retirement? The nest egg you've been bragging about to your friends? The one that's going to fund your luxury lifestyle at Sunset Manor? I'm willing to bet that at least half of it is money I've given you that you've simply saved. While I worked myself to exhaustion to keep your lives comfortable, you were hoarding my contributions and calling them your retirement fund, the Grandfather clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, coating the windows with white that made the room feel even more isolated from the rest of the world. Finally, Richard stood up, his full height, and presence filling the room with menace. "You're being dramatic, Sophia. We're family. Family helps family. That's what family does." "You're right," I said, surprising him. "That is what family does. Family helps family. Family supports each other. Family shows up when times are tough." I paused, letting the words settle. "So, tell me, when was the last time you helped me with anything? When was the last time you asked how I was doing, how my business was going, if I needed anything? When was the last time you showed up for me?" The silence was my answer. "That's what I thought," I said, picking up my suitcase again. "You know what? You're absolutely right about one thing. I am 34 years old. I am old enough to know better. Old enough to stop enabling people who see my love as weakness and my generosity as entitlement. Old enough to stop funding a lifestyle for people who think I'm a disappointment." Patricia made one last desperate attempt. "Sophia, honey, you're overreacting. We love you. This is about helping you grow up and become independent." "Independent?" I almost laughed. "Mom, I own my own company. I have my own house. I pay my own bills and yours too, apparently. I'm more independent than both of you combined. What I'm not independent from is the need to buy your approval. But that ends tonight." And with that, I turned toward the door, leaving behind the Christmas I'd thought I was coming home to celebrate. I stood in the driveway of 847 Maple Ridge Drive, snowflakes melting on my cheeks like cold tears I refused to shed. My car sat under the streetlight, already dusted with white, looking as abandoned as I felt. The suitcase handle bit into my palm as I gripped it tighter, the only solid thing in a world that had just tilted completely off its axis. Behind me, the house glowed with warm yellow light spilling from every window, the Christmas tree visible through the living room's floor-to-ceiling glass. From the outside, it looked like a magazine cover. "Perfect Family Christmas," in elegant script across the bottom. The Hendersons' synchronized light show next door continued its cheerful melody, completely oblivious to the fact that a family had just imploded 20 feet away. I clicked the unlock button on my key fob, the sound sharp in the muffled quiet of the snowfall. As I loaded my suitcase into the trunk, muscle memory kicked in. This wasn't the first time I'd packed hastily and left somewhere that was supposed to be home. College dorms, shared apartments, rental houses. I'd gotten good at moving on when situations became untenable. But this felt different. This felt final. The car's interior was freezing, my breath visible in small puffs as I sat behind the wheel and tried to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant, Maya, probably wondering if I needed anything handled before the office closed for the holiday weekend. I stared at the screen, the normalcy of work notifications, feeling surreal after what I'd just experienced. That's when it hit me, the phone in my hand, the company I'd built, the life I'd created entirely separate from this house, this family, this elaborate charade of dysfunction. I wasn't homeless. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't the desperate daughter begging for scraps of approval anymore. I was Sophia Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Holdings, owner of multiple properties, including one very specific property that was about to become extremely relevant. I started laughing. Not the bitter, broken laugh of someone who'd lost everything, but the incredulous laughter of someone who'd just realized they'd been holding all the cards without knowing it. My parents had just kicked out their landlord. They'd just evicted their primary source of income. They'd just thrown away the daughter who owned the retirement home they were planning to move into in 28 days. The irony was so perfect it almost seemed scripted. I pulled out of the driveway slowly, taking one last look at the house in my rearview mirror, the Christmas wreath on the front door, the garland wrapped around the porch columns, the tasteful white lights outlining the roofline. All of it funded by the woman they'd just discarded like yesterday's newspaper. By this time next month, when the bills started arriving and the automatic payments failed, they'd discover exactly how much their disappointing daughter had been subsidizing their picture-perfect life. My phone rang as I reached the main road. Maya's name flashed on the screen. "Hey," I answered, putting her on speaker. "Sophia? You sound weird. Everything okay?" I glanced in the rearview mirror one more time, watching the lights of Millbrook Heights fade behind me. "Actually, Maya, I think everything might be more okay than it's been in years, but I need you to do me a favor. Can you pull the Sunset Manor file? I want to review the lease agreement for units 247 and 248. The retirement community? Sure, but why? Wait, isn't that where your parents are moving?" It is indeed. I merged onto the highway, windshield wipers fighting the steadily falling snow. And I think it's time I took a more active role in property management. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Maya had worked for me for 3 years. She knew about my family's complicated dynamics, though she'd never known the full extent of my financial support. She was also smart enough to read between the lines. "Oh," she said slowly. "Oh, this is going to be interesting. That's one word for it. Can you also pull up the automatic transfer schedules?" "All of them. I need to review which payments are going out to various accounts. The family assistance accounts? Those would be the ones. Consider it done. Sophia? Whatever happened tonight, I'm sorry. But also, it's about time." After hanging up, I drove in silence for a while, letting the reality settle in. For 8 years, I'd been living 2 lives. The successful businesswoman who commanded respect in boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals, and the desperate daughter who threw money at problems hoping to buy love. Tonight, those 2 lives had finally collided, and only one of them was going to survive. I thought about the conversation I'd just had with my parents. Their shock when I'd laid out the numbers, their pathetic attempts to justify taking my money while criticizing my choices, their complete inability to see the contradiction in their behavior. They wanted me gone, but they expected the bank transfers to continue. They wanted to cut me out of their lives while keeping me as their private ATM. That wasn't going to happen. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of the Marriott downtown, I'd made my decision. Not just about the money, that was the easy part. The transfers would stop immediately, but something bigger was crystallizing in my mind. A plan that would teach my parents exactly what family helps family actually meant. I checked into a suite using my corporate account, tipping the bellhop who helped with my single suitcase, and ignoring his curious glance at my lack of luggage, for what was clearly going to be an extended stay. The room was generic but comfortable, nothing like the carefully curated perfection of my childhood home. It smelled like industrial cleaning products instead of cinnamon candles, and the silence was broken by the distant hum of the heating system instead of the judgmental ticking of an antique clock. I kicked off my heels and opened my laptop on the desk by the window. Outside, Millbrook's downtown was mostly deserted, except for a few holiday stragglers hurrying through the snow. The Christmas lights strung between the lampposts looked cheerful and warm. Nothing like the calculated display I'd just escaped. Maya had already uploaded the files I'd requested. The Sunset Manor lease agreement for units 247 and 248, a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom luxury apartment with a view of the community's private lake. Monthly rent, $4,800. Security deposit, $9,600. Lease term, 2 years, with automatic renewal clauses that heavily favored the landlord. Pet policy, no pets allowed. Noise restrictions, strictly enforced. Maintenance requests must be submitted through the management company with 48-hour notice for non-emergency issues. I'd written that lease myself, designed it to attract affluent retirees who wanted luxury without the hassle of home ownership. The terms were generous but firm, the amenities were top-notch, and the waiting list was extensive. My parents had been thrilled when they'd been selected for residency, never knowing that the management company was just another arm of my business. Empire, the automatic transfer schedule made for interesting reading, too. Mortgage payment to Richard and Patricia's bank, $2,047 monthly. Property tax assistance, $680 monthly. Insurance supplements, $340 monthly. Emergency fund contributions, $500 monthly. Miscellaneous support transfers, averaging $800 monthly, $5,167 every month, for 8 years. Over $500,000 in total support, not counting the one-off emergency payments for cars, medical bills, home repairs, and their various investment opportunities that somehow always needed last-minute funding. I stared at the numbers on my screen, feeling that familiar surge of anger mixed with something new. Relief. Relief that I finally knew exactly how much I'd been spending to buy scraps of approval from people who saw me as nothing more than a renewable resource. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Then another. Then my phone started ringing. It was starting. I turned the phone face down on the desk and opened a new document. At the top, I typed, Sunset Manor, Lease Violation Protocol. It was time to remind my parents that actions have consequences, and that family, real family, worked both ways. The snow continued falling outside my window, covering Millbrook in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new. By morning, the world would be transformed, ready for a fresh start, just like me. The clock on my laptop showed 11:47 p.m. when I opened the banking portal that would change everything. Room service had delivered coffee an hour ago. Strong, black, and bitter enough to keep me focused through what was about to become the longest night of my life. Outside, Christmas Day was officially 13 minutes away, but I wasn't thinking about presents or family gatherings anymore. I was thinking about justice. The first step was surgical precision. No emotional decisions, no reactive moves that I'd regret later. This wasn't about revenge. It was about establishing boundaries that should have existed years ago. I pulled up the spreadsheet Maya had compiled, cross-referencing every automatic payment, every scheduled transfer, every financial lifeline. I'd extended to people who'd just told me I was disposable. The mortgage payment was scheduled to auto-transfer at 6 a.m. on December 27th. I canceled it with 3 clicks. The property tax assistance, set to go out on the 30th, canceled. Insurance supplements, emergency fund contributions, the monthly cushion payments that had somehow become as regular as their utility bills. Gone, gone, gone. Each cancellation felt like cutting a rope that had been strangling me for years. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. For the first time in nearly a decade, my money was going to stay in my accounts. My financial planning would serve my goals, not subsidize. People who saw my success as their entitlement. But the bank transfers were just the beginning. I opened a new browser tab and logged into the Sunset Manor management portal. As the owner of the property, I had access to every lease, every payment record, every communication between the management company and residents. What I found in Richard and Patricia's file made my coffee taste even more bitter. They'd been model tenants during the application process. Credit checks came back solid. Of course they did, since I'd been propping up their finances for years. Income verification showed steady payments from what they claimed were investment returns and retirement distributions. The same money I'd been quietly funneling into their accounts, repackaged and presented as their own financial savvy. Their move-in date was January 22nd, just 28 days away. Security deposit, paid in full. First month's rent, scheduled. For automatic withdrawal. Pet fee, not applicable. Community orientation, scheduled for January 15th. I scrolled through their communications with the management company, my management company. Patricia had sent several emails about customization requests for their unit. She wanted upgraded appliances, premium cable packages, priority parking. The tone of her messages was demanding, entitled, as if she was doing them a favor by gracing them with her presence. "We're accustomed to a certain standard of living," one email read. "I trust that Sunset Manor will accommodate our expectations accordingly." I laughed out loud in my empty hotel room. Accustomed to a certain standard of living. A standard I'd been bankrolling while she criticized my life choices and questioned my priorities. The beautiful irony was that Richard and Patricia had chosen Sunset Manor specifically because of its reputation for discretion and exclusivity. The management company, Hartwell Holdings, was known for maintaining tenant privacy and handling all interactions through intermediaries. They'd specifically requested minimal contact with corporate ownership because they valued their privacy. They'd gotten exactly what they asked for. They had no idea who owned their dream retirement home. They were about to find out. I opened a new document and began drafting what would become the most satisfying email of my professional career. But first, I needed to review the lease terms they'd agreed to. The document was thorough, written by lawyers who understood the importance of protecting property owners from problematic tenants. Section 12.3 was particularly relevant. Lease. Agreements are contingent upon the continued accuracy of all financial information provided during the application process. Misrepresentation of income sources, employment status, or financial stability may result in immediate lease termination. Section 8.7 covered community standards. Sunset Manor maintains a family-friendly environment built on mutual respect and consideration. Residents who engage in harassment, intimidation, or abusive behavior toward staff, management, or other residents may face lease termination. Section 15.2 addressed payment obligations. All rent and fees must be paid from verified, legitimate income sources. Payments from third parties or undisclosed financial arrangements may constitute lease violation. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. I spent the next hour crafting a communication that would serve multiple purposes. It needed to be professional enough to hold up to legal scrutiny, specific enough to make the connection clear, and devastating enough to drive home the reality of their situation. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell," I began, then paused. The formality felt strange after 34 years of calling them Mom and Dad. But they'd made their choice about our relationship status. I was simply respecting their decision. This communication serves as formal notice regarding your upcoming residency at Sunset Manor, Units 247-248. During our routine verification process for new residents, several discrepancies have been identified in your financial documentation that require immediate clarification. Our records indicate that your stated income sources during the application process may not accurately reflect your actual financial situation. Specifically, the investment returns and retirement distributions listed as your primary income appear to correlate directly with regular transfers from accounts associated with Hartwell Holdings, LLC. As you may be aware, Sunset Manor is owned and operated by Hartwell Holdings, LLC. This creates a unique situation that requires careful consideration of potential conflicts of interest and lease agreement compliance. Additionally, recent communications intercepted by our management team indicate concerns about your suitability as residents within our family-oriented community. Comments regarding family relationships and personal conduct suggest potential incompatibility with our community values. We are requesting immediate clarification regarding the source and legitimacy of your stated income, your relationship with Hartwell Holdings, LLC and its principals, your commitment to maintaining the respectful, family-oriented atmosphere that Sunset Manor residents expect. Please be advised that failure to provide satisfactory responses within 72 hours may result in lease review and potential termination in accordance with Sections 12.3, 8.7, and 15.2 of your signed agreement. We appreciate your prompt attention to this matter and look forward to resolving these concerns quickly. Sincerely, Sunset Manor Management Team, a division of Hartwell Holdings, LLC. I read through the email 3 times, checking for tone and legal accuracy. It was professional, procedural, and devastating. They would read it and initially be confused, then worried, then absolutely terrified as the implications sank in. But I wasn't done. The next step required accessing the property management system that controlled building access, utilities, and services for Sunset Manor. As the owner, I had administrative privileges that allowed me to make certain adjustments. I pulled up their unit profile. Richard and Patricia had specifically requested premium services: daily housekeeping, concierge assistance, priority maintenance, upgraded meal plans, and access to the executive dining room. All upgrades that carried additional monthly fees. They'd planned to pay with money I'd been providing. I downgraded every single premium service to the basic package. Not eliminated, that would be too obvious and potentially legally problematic, but reduced to the absolute minimum that their lease agreement guaranteed: basic housekeeping once per week instead of daily, standard maintenance response times instead of priority, regular dining room access instead of executive privileges. Then I reviewed their move-in schedule. They'd arranged for premium moving, services, expedited utility connections, and priority unpacking assistance, all services coordinated through the management company at significant additional cost. I canceled the premium moving package and switched them to the standard service, the one with a 3-week waiting list. I changed their utility connection from expedited to standard processing, adding approximately 10 days to the timeline. The unpacking assistance was rescheduled to when available, which, given the holiday season and staff schedules, would likely be sometime in February. Every change was documented with perfectly reasonable explanations. Due to increased demand during peak moving season, and standard processing times ensure quality service for all residents. Each modification was professional, justified, and utterly infuriating for people accustomed to having every convenience at their fingertips, but the masterpiece was still to come. I accessed the communication system that Sunset Manor used to send community updates to residents and prospective residents. The system allowed for targeted messaging based on move-in dates, unit types, and resident preferences. Perfect for what I had in mind, I composed a community newsletter that would be automatically distributed to all January move-ins, including Richard and Patricia. The subject line read, "Welcome to your new beginning. Important community updates." The newsletter contained all the usual information about community events, dining schedules, and facility updates. But buried in the middle, in a section titled Community Spotlight, Family Values in Action, I included a feature story. This month, we're celebrating the importance of family bonds and mutual support. Studies show that strong family relationships are the foundation of happiness in retirement communities. We're proud to share that many of our residents have benefited from the love and support of family members who helped make their retirement dreams possible. We believe that acknowledging these contributions strengthens our community bonds. When family members sacrifice to support their loved ones' dreams, it demonstrates the values that make Sunset Manor special. In the spirit of transparency and gratitude, we encourage all residents to acknowledge the family members whose support has made their residency possible. Whether through direct financial assistance, co-signing arrangements, or other forms of support, these contributions deserve recognition. Our community thrives when built on honesty, gratitude, and mutual respect. We look forward to celebrating these family bonds throughout the coming year. The article was perfectly innocent on its surface. It could apply to anyone. But Richard and Patricia would know exactly who it was about, and so would anyone else who might read between the lines. By 3 a.m., I had systematically dismantled every assumption my parents had made about their comfortable future. Their automatic income would disappear within days. Their luxury retirement would be downgraded to basic accommodations. Their move-in process would be delayed and complicated. And hanging over everything would be the growing suspicion that their disappointing daughter might have more control over their situation than they'd ever imagined. I saved all the documents, scheduled the email to send at 9 a.m. on December 26th, the day after Christmas, when they'd be expecting to relax and enjoy their holiday, and finally allowed myself to feel the satisfaction of a job well done. The snow had stopped falling outside my window. The streets were empty and peaceful, covered in white that made everything look clean and new. In a few hours, families across Millbrook would be waking up to Christmas morning, gathering around trees, exchanging gifts, pretending to be grateful for relationships they'd taken for granted. But Richard and Patricia would be waking up to something else entirely. They'd be waking up to the consequences of treating family love like a renewable resource and discovering that even the most patient daughters eventually reach their breaking point. I closed my laptop and finally allowed myself to smile. Christmas morning was going to be very interesting indeed. I woke up on Christmas morning to the sound of my phone vibrating against the hotel nightstand like an angry wasp. The digital clock glowed 7:23 a.m., and I had 17 missed calls. 17. On Christmas morning, the irony wasn't lost on me. The family that had kicked me out on Christmas Eve was now desperately trying to reach me on Christmas Day. The first voicemail was from Patricia, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Sophia, honey, there's been some kind of mistake with our bank account. The mortgage payment didn't go through, and we're getting calls from the bank. Please call me back immediately. This is urgent." I deleted it without finishing and moved to the next one. Richard's voice, gruff and demanding. "Sophia, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to fix whatever you've done to our accounts. The insurance company is saying our payment was declined. Call me back. Now. Delete." The third voicemail was Patricia again, this time with tears in her voice. "Sweetheart, I know we had words last night, but this isn't the time for petty revenge. We need you to call us back. There are problems with multiple accounts, and we don't understand what's happening. Please, it's Christmas. We can work through our differences, but right now we need your help." I sat up in bed, wrapping the hotel robe around me, and listened to the rest of the messages. The progression was fascinating from a psychological standpoint. Confusion, then anger, then desperation, then attempts at manipulation. By the 10th message, Patricia was sobbing openly, talking about how they'd always loved me and how family forgives family, family forgives family. The audacity was breathtaking. I ordered room service, coffee, fresh fruit, and eggs Benedict, because if I was going to watch my parents' world implode, I was going to do it with a proper breakfast. While I waited for the food to arrive, I checked my banking app. All the canceled transfers showed as stopped payment with timestamps from the early morning hours. Perfect. My phone rang again. Patricia's number. I let it go to voicemail, then it rang again, and again. By the time my breakfast arrived, I had 37 missed calls and counting. The young woman delivering room service looked apologetic as she wheeled in the cart. "I'm sorry about the delay," she said. "The elevator's been acting up all morning." "No problem at all," I told her, signing the receipt and adding a generous tip. "Happy Christmas." "Happy Christmas to you too. Are you okay? Your phone's been ringing nonstop." I glanced at the device, which was currently buzzing with call. Number 38. "Family," I said with a wry smile. "You know how it is." She laughed and left me to my breakfast and my steadily ringing phone. At 9 a.m. sharp, I watched as my scheduled email sent automatically. The timestamp showed 9 a.m. exactly. Professional precision, even in destruction. I imagined Richard checking his email between frantic phone calls to the bank, expecting maybe some holiday greetings from business associates. Instead, he'd find a formal communication from Sunset Manor management questioning the legitimacy of their income and threatening their lease. I ate my eggs, Benedict slowly, savoring both the hollandaise sauce and the anticipation. The calls had stopped temporarily, probably because they were reading the email, processing its implications, and realizing that their problems were far bigger than a few missed bank transfers. The silence lasted exactly 12 minutes. When the phone started ringing again, I answered on the third ring. Sophia Hartwell speaking. "What the hell have you done?" Richard's voice exploded through the speaker, raw with fury and panic. "Good morning to you too, Dad. Happy Christmas. Don't you dare Happy Christmas me. What did you do to our accounts? And what is this email from Sunset Manor? They're threatening to cancel our lease." I took a sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch. "I'm not sure what you mean. Could you be more specific?" "You know damn well what I mean. The mortgage payment bounced. The insurance payments were declined. And now our retirement home is questioning our finances. This is your doing." "My doing?" I injected just the right amount of confusion into my voice. "How could any of that be my doing? You made it very clear last night that I have no role in your lives. How could someone with no role in your lives possibly affect your financial situation?" The silence on the other end was deafening. I could practically hear the gears turning as Richard realized the trap he'd walked into. "This is ridiculous," he finally sputtered. You can't just stop helping family because of one argument." "Help?" I repeated. "But I thought I was just a freeloader who treated your house like a hotel. Why would a freeloader be in a position to help anyone financially?" Patricia's voice came through the background, sharp and desperate. "Let me talk to her." There was shuffling. Then Patricia's voice came through clearly. "Sophia, sweetheart, we know you're upset about last night, but this isn't the way to handle things. We're family. We love you. Sometimes family members say things they don't mean when they're stressed." "Stressed about what?" I asked innocently. "What could you possibly be stressed about?" "According to your financial statements to Sunset Manor, you have steady investment income and solid retirement distributions. Surely a temporary glitch with some bank transfers wouldn't affect people with such stable finances." Another long silence. You know about Sunset Manor?" Patricia's voice had gone very small. "I know lots of things, Mom. For instance, I know that your investment income and retirement distributions have been coming from a very specific source for the past 8 years. I know that your mortgage payments, insurance premiums, property taxes, and various emergency expenses have all been funded by someone you apparently consider disposable. Sophia, I also know," I continued, cutting her off, "that your dream retirement community is owned by Hartwell Holdings LLC. Interesting name for a company, don't you think?" The silence that followed was so complete I wondered if the call had dropped. Then I heard Patricia's sharp intake of breath as the full implications hit her. "You." Richard's voice was barely a whisper. "You own Sunset Manor." "I own a lot of things, Dad. Apparently more than you realized." "This is extortion." Richard's voice cracked with rage. "You can't hold our home hostage because your feelings got hurt." "Extortion?" I laughed, genuinely amused. "I'm not holding anything hostage. You're welcome to pay your rent like any other tenant. You're welcome to cover your mortgage, insurance, and other expenses like any other adults. You're welcome to live independently, just like you wanted me to do. But we can't afford—" Patricia started, then stopped, realizing what she'd almost admitted. "Can't afford what, Mom? Can't afford to live without your daughter's financial support? The same daughter you kicked out for being irresponsible and immature?" "We never said you were irresponsible," Patricia protested weakly. "You're right. You said I was a freeloader with no direction in life who was too old to be living at home. So I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. Independence. From your disappointing daughter." My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Holy shit, boss. The Sunset Manor Management Company is getting bombarded with calls. Whatever you did, it's working." I smiled and returned my attention to the call, where Richard was apparently having some kind of breakdown. 30 years of marriage, 34. Years of raising a child, and this is how it ends. With our own daughter destroying us? I'm not destroying anything, Dad. I'm simply no longer building you up. There's a difference. The mortgage payment is due in 3 days, Patricia said, her voice hollow. If it doesn't go through, we could lose the house. That sounds like a problem you should probably solve, I replied. I'm sure your financial advisor would have excellent suggestions. You do have a financial advisor, right? Someone who's been helping you manage all those investment returns and retirement distributions? Silence. Or perhaps you could contact your bank about a loan modification. I understand they're very understanding with seniors on fixed incomes. Sophia, please. Patricia was crying now. We're your parents. We made a mistake. We were wrong to ask you to leave. Can't we work this out? Work what out exactly? You made your position very clear last night. You want me to be independent. Well, congratulations. I'm being independent. I'm independently deciding how to spend my money, independently choosing who deserves my support, and independently running my business. Your business? Richard's voice was sharp. What does your business have to do with any of this? Well, since Sunset Manor is my business, it has quite a lot to do with your housing situation. And since Hartwell Holdings manages several other properties in the area, it might affect your future housing options as well. The implications of that statement hung in the air like a sword. I owned more than just their retirement home. I owned apartment complexes, rental properties, even some commercial real estate in Millbrook. In a small town like this, crossing the wrong landlord could make finding alternative housing challenging. You can't do this, Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, I can do whatever I want. It's called property rights and business decisions. I'm sure you understand. After all, you taught me the importance of fiscal responsibility. What do you want? Patricia asked, her voice barely audible. I want you to experience the independence you insisted I needed. I want you to handle your own problems, pay your own bills, and make your own way in the world. Isn't that what responsible adults do? But we can't what? Live without me? Funny, because last night you seemed pretty confident that you could. The silence stretched. For nearly a minute, I could hear muffled conversation in the background, probably them conferring about what to say next. Finally, Richard came back on the line. What would it take for you to reconsider? Reconsider what? The transfers? The lease? All of it. I pretended to think about it. Well, that's an interesting question. What could you possibly offer me that would make me want to resume funding your lifestyle? We're your parents, Patricia said desperately. We love you. We raised you. You kicked me out on Christmas Eve, I interrupted. After 8 years of accepting my money while criticizing my choices, after 3 decades of making me feel like I was never good enough, after telling me I was irresponsible and immature while secretly depending on my success to fund your dreams. We can change, Patricia said quickly. We can be better. You? Know what? I believe you can change. I believe you can learn to be grateful, respectful, and appreciative. But you're going to learn those lessons the hard way, because the easy way clearly didn't work. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked both their numbers. Within minutes, texts started arriving from other family members. Aunt Helen. What's going on with your parents? Richard called in a panic about money problems. Uncle Bob. Patricia called crying about Sunset Manor. Can you call them back? Cousin Jennifer. Whatever fight you're having with your parents, this isn't the way to handle it. I turned off my phone and finished my breakfast in blessed silence. Outside my hotel window, families were probably gathering for Christmas morning gift exchanges. Children were tearing open presents while parents sipped coffee and pretended to be surprised by ties and perfume. normal families having normal holidays, blissfully unaware that 20 floors above them, a daughter was having the best Christmas morning of her adult life. Because for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't worried about anyone else's problems. I wasn't fielding calls about emergencies that required immediate financial solutions. I wasn't pretending to be grateful for scraps of approval from people who saw me as an ATM with emotions. I was free, and Richard and Patricia were about to learn exactly how expensive that freedom had been. The counteroffensive began on December 27th at 6:47 a.m. with a phone call from my Aunt Helen that I almost didn't answer. I'd been enjoying 2 blissful days of silence, working from my hotel suite, catching up on business emails, and luxuriating in the novel experience of not being anyone's financial safety net. But Helen's name on my caller ID made me curious, enough to pick up. "Sophia. Thank God," she breathed into the phone. "I've been so worried about you. Your parents told me what happened, and I can't believe you'd do something so cruel." I set down my coffee mug and leaned back in the hotel's ergonomic desk chair. "Good morning, Aunt Helen. What exactly did they tell you happened?" "They said you had some kind of breakdown on Christmas Eve, that you stormed out after they tried to have a reasonable conversation about your future, and now you're refusing to help them with some kind of financial emergency. They're beside themselves with worry. A breakdown. A reasonable conversation. The revisionist history was starting already." "That's an interesting interpretation of events," I said carefully. "What kind of financial emergency are they having?" Helen's voice took on that particular tone that family members use when they're about to deliver unsolicited advice. "Sophia, I know you've been very successful with your little computer business, and I'm proud of you for that. But success doesn't give you the right to abandon your family when they need you most. My little computer business." The cybersecurity firm that had just closed a $3 million contract with a Fortune 100 company was being reduced to a cute hobby by someone who'd never held a job more demanding than part-time retail. "Aunt Helen, can I ask you something? In all the years you've known me, have I ever asked my parents for money?" "Well, no, but have I ever caused them financial problems? Damaged their property? Stolen from them? Defaulted on loans they co-signed?" "Of course not, but that's not the point." "What is the point then?" "What exactly am I supposed to be grateful for that justifies funding their entire lifestyle while they criticize everything about mine?" There was a pause. "Funding their lifestyle? Sophia, what are you talking about? Your parents have always been very financially responsible. They've worked hard their whole lives and saved for retirement." I almost laughed. The mythology was so complete, so thoroughly constructed, that even close family members believed it. "Aunt Helen, did you know that I've been paying their mortgage for the past 8 years? That's ridiculous. They own their house free and clear. They own a house that I've been making payments on since 2016. Would you like to see the bank records?" Silence. "Did you know that their investment returns come from monthly transfers I make to their accounts? Or that their insurance premiums, property taxes, and emergency expenses have all been funded by their irresponsible daughter? Sophia, even if that's true, even if it's true?" My voice sharpened. "Aunt Helen, there's no if about it. I have 8 years of documentation. Bank transfers, payment records, receipts for everything from car repairs to medical bills. They've been living entirely off my income while telling everyone about their smart financial planning. But they're your parents. Even if you've been helping them, that's what families do. You help each other?" "You're absolutely right. Families do help each other. So tell me, when was the last time Richard or Patricia helped me with anything? When did they offer emotional support during my divorce? When did they celebrate my business successes? When did they ask if I needed anything, ever, for any reason?" The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Family isn't supposed to be a one-way street, Aunt Helen. It's not supposed to be one person giving everything while 2 other people take credit for the results. Maybe they didn't realize they kicked me out on Christmas Eve, I said quietly. after I'd spent the day working on a proposal that would expand my business and create 20 new jobs in this town. They handed me a suitcase and told me I was too old to freeload. The same night I was supposed to be celebrating with family, they made me homeless. Oh. Helen's voice had gotten very small. They said you left after an argument. I left after they evicted me. There's a difference. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, processing this new information against whatever story Richard and Patricia had fed her. Sophia, I didn't know. But surely there's some way to work this out? They're family and they're getting older. They need to learn that actions have consequences. For 34 years, I've been trying to earn their approval by being useful, by solving their problems, covering their expenses, and making their lives easier. And for 34 years, they've made it clear that nothing I do will ever be enough. But what about their house, their retirement plans? What about them? They're adults. They can figure out their own problems just like every other adult in the world. The call ended shortly after that, with Helen promising to pray for our family and hoping we could find a way to heal. I hung up knowing it was just the beginning. Over the next 3 days, the calls came in waves. Uncle Bob, who'd always been Richard's golfing buddy, tried the stern father approach. Young lady, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this behavior is unacceptable. Your parents raised you better than this. I almost enjoyed that conversation. Uncle Bob, you're absolutely right. They did raise me better than this. They raised me to believe that family members support each other, respect each other, and treat each other with kindness. Which makes it even more disappointing that they chose to abandon those values when it came to their own daughter. Cousin Jennifer went for emotional manipulation. Sophia, I'm worried about you. This isn't like you. Maybe you should talk to someone? A therapist? I think you might be having some kind of emotional crisis. The suggestion that standing up for myself indicated mental illness was particularly insulting. Jennifer, I've never been more mentally healthy in my life. 4. The first time in years I'm not anxious about other people's problems. I'm not losing sleep over bills that aren't mine. I'm not walking on eggshells trying to avoid criticism from people who should be grateful for my help. But the most sophisticated attack came from my godmother, Patricia's sister Margaret, who had clearly been coached. Darling, she said in her carefully cultivated boarding school accent, I understand you're going through a difficult time. 34 is such a challenging age for women, especially successful women who haven't settled down yet. Sometimes we can start to feel like our achievements aren't enough, and we lash out at the people closest to us. The casual sexism was breathtaking. My business success was being pathologized as some kind of compensation for my failure to land a husband. Aunt Margaret, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not lashing out at anyone. I'm simply declining to continue subsidizing people who see my generosity as weakness. But darling, that's exactly what I mean. You're seeing malice where there's just family dynamics. Your parents love you. They're proud of you. But they're also from a different generation. They don't always know how to express their feelings in ways that our generation understands. Are you saying that kicking me out on Christmas Eve was just poor emotional expression? I'm saying that family relationships are complicated, and sometimes we have to be the bigger person. You have so much to give, Sophia. Your parents are getting older, and they need your strength and support. Isn't forgiveness a better choice than revenge? The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Margaret deploying every manipulation technique in the family playbook. Guilt about abandoning elderly parents, shame about my unforgiving nature, suggestions that successful women had a responsibility to support their families, implications that my childlessness had made me bitter and selfish. By the time I hung up, I was actually impressed by the sophistication of the psychological warfare. They'd clearly spent time developing a coordinated strategy, complete with talking, points and assigned roles. Uncle Bob was the authoritarian father figure. Helen was the concerned relative. Jennifer was the worried cousin suggesting mental health intervention. Margaret was the sophisticated aunt offering wisdom about family dynamics and feminine duty. But the masterpiece came on December 30th, when my phone rang at 2:17 a.m. Sophia? Oh, thank God you answered. Patricia's voice was shaky, breathless. Something's wrong with your father. He's having chest pains. We're at Millbrook General. Can you come? Please? I can't handle this alone. My heart rate spiked immediately, adrenaline flooding my system before my rational mind could catch up. This was the emergency I'd been dreading, the crisis that would force me back into the family dynamic regardless of my boundaries. What happened? I asked, already reaching for my clothes. He was so upset about everything that's been happening. The stress, the financial problems, the uncertainty about our future. He's been having trouble sleeping, not eating well. Tonight he just collapsed. The doctors are running tests, but they think it might be his heart. I was halfway dressed before I stopped myself. Something felt wrong. Not wrong about Richard's condition. That could be completely real. Wrong about the call itself. Mom, what time did this happen? About an hour ago. We've been here waiting, and I need my daughter. I need you here. Which doctor are you seeing? Dr. Patel. He's in the emergency department. Sophia, please. Just come. I sat down on the edge of the hotel bed, my partially dressed body shaking with conflicting emotions. The desire to rush to my father's side warred with a growing suspicion that this was exactly what it appeared to be. The ultimate manipulation. Mom, I'm going to call the hospital directly to check on Dad's condition. Then I'll decide what to do. What? No, don't call them. Just come. He's asking for you. That was the tell. Richard had never asked for me in his life. Through my childhood illnesses, my college struggles, my divorce, my business challenges, he'd never once expressed a desire for my presence during a crisis. I'll call you back, I said, and hung up. I called Millbrook General's emergency department. Hi, I'm calling to check on a patient who was brought in tonight. Richard Hartwell. I'm his daughter. I'm sorry, but I don't show any patient by that name in our system tonight. Could you check again? He would have come in within the last few hours with chest pains. I've checked all our admissions for the past 12 hours. No Richard Hartwell. I hung up and immediately called Patricia back. Mom, I just called the hospital. Dad isn't there. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the hotel's air conditioning cycling on. What did you say? I said Dad isn't at Millbrook General. They have no record of him being admitted tonight. You actually called. To check? Her voice was small, caught. Did you seriously think I wouldn't? Sophia, I can explain. Don't. My voice was deadly quiet. Don't you dare try to explain faking a medical emergency to manipulate your daughter into resuming financial support. It wasn't fake. Your father has been stressed. He could have chest pains. I was just trying to prevent a real emergency by creating a fake one. We're desperate, Sophia. We don't know what else to do. The mortgage payment is due tomorrow, and we don't have the money. We could lose everything. Then you should have thought of that before you decided I was disposable. I hung up and immediately blocked her number, just as I had with Richard's. But I knew this wasn't over. If they were willing to fake medical emergencies, they were desperate enough to try anything. The next phase of their campaign would be even more vicious. I could feel it coming, but I was ready. Because I'd learned something important that night. My parents weren't just financially dependent on me. They were psychologically dependent on my guilt, my sense of obligation, my desperate need for their approval. And for the first time in my life, I was fresh out of all three. January 2nd brought the news I'd been expecting but still wasn't prepared for. Maya called at 7:30 a.m., her voice tight with controlled anger. Sophia, we have a problem. Someone's been calling our clients. I set down my morning coffee. the ceramic mug suddenly feeling heavy in my hands. "What kind of calls?" Richard called. "Henderson Industries yesterday. Told them you were having a family crisis that was affecting your mental stability. He suggested they might want to reconsider their contract renewal." The violation was so profound it took my breath away. My parents hadn't just attacked me personally. They were now targeting my livelihood, the business I'd built from nothing, the reputation I'd spent a decade crafting. Did Henderson buy it? James Henderson laughed and told him to stop wasting his time with family drama. "But Sophia, if they're calling clients, they're not going to stop here. This is scorched earth territory." She was right. The fake medical emergency had been their final attempt at manipulation. Now they were moving into pure destruction mode. If they couldn't control me through guilt, they'd try to destroy everything I'd built until I had no choice but to submit. "Pull together a list of all our major clients and send out a professional heads up," I said. "Nothing dramatic, just a brief note that we're aware of some disgruntled former employees making false claims, and that any concern should be directed to you immediately." Former employees? As far as our clients are concerned, yes. My parents no longer exist in my professional life. After hanging up with Maya, I spent an hour documenting every attempt at manipulation, every fake emergency, every lie they'd told, to family members. If this was going to be a war, I needed ammunition. But the real revelation came when I opened my laptop and found 17 new emails in my personal account. All from people I barely knew, all with subject lines like, "Worried about you and family concerns." The first was from Mrs. Carmichael, my third-grade teacher who was now well into her 70s. "Dear Sophia, I heard from Patricia at the grocery store that you've been having some difficulties. She's so worried about you, dear. Sometimes success can be overwhelming for young people, and it's important to remember that family is what really matters. I hope you'll reconsider whatever disagreement you're having with your parents. They love you so much." I stared at the email, my hands actually trembling with rage. Patricia had been making the rounds in Millbrook, spinning her narrative to anyone who would listen. The grocery store, the post office, probably the coffee shop and the library too. She was systematically poisoning every relationship I had in my hometown. The next email was from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, my childhood pediatrician. "Sophia, your mother came to see me yesterday, extremely concerned about your welfare. While I can't discuss specifics due to patient confidentiality, I wanted you to know that there are resources available if you're struggling with depression or anxiety. Success-driven individuals often experience burnout that can manifest in destructive behaviors toward family relationships." My childhood doctor was now questioning my mental health based on my mother's manipulation. The professional, personal, and familial boundaries were being obliterated systematically. But the email that made me see red was from Father Michael at St. Catherine's, the church I'd attended sporadically as a child. "My dear Sophia, your parents visited me yesterday in great distress about your situation. They're heartbroken about the estrangement and deeply concerned about your spiritual welfare. Pride is one of the 7 deadly sins, and it can lead us away from the love and forgiveness that family represents. I'm available anytime if you'd like to discuss reconciliation and the healing power of forgiveness." They were weaponizing my childhood community against me. Every person who had known me as a little girl was now being recruited into their campaign of psychological warfare. I closed my laptop and called the one person who would understand the full scope of what was happening. "Legal aid office, this is Jennifer speaking." "Hi, this is Sophia Hartwell. I need to speak with someone about harassment and defamation." An hour later, I was sitting across from Margaret Chen, a sharp-eyed attorney who specialized in family law and harassment cases. I laid out the entire situation: the years of financial support, the Christmas Eve eviction, the fake medical emergency, and now the systematic campaign to destroy my reputation. "They're trying to isolate you," Margaret said, reviewing my documentation. "Classic abuser playbook. When they can't control you directly, they attack your support systems until you have nowhere to turn but back to them. Can we stop them legally? We can try. Defamation requires proving damages to your reputation or business. If they're calling your clients, that could qualify. The false medical emergency might constitute fraud. And if they're spreading lies about your mental health, that's definitely defamatory. What would you recommend? Margaret leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Honestly, the legal route is slow and expensive, and family members often get sympathy from juries. But you have something better than a lawsuit, which is documentation and leverage. You own their retirement home. You have 8 years of financial records proving their dependence. And from what you've told me, they're about to default on their mortgage. She was right. While they were busy destroying my reputation, they were also destroying their own financial stability. The mortgage payment had been due January 1st. Today was January 2nd. They were already in default. Here's what I'd do, Margaret continued. Go completely dark, no responses to anything. Let them escalate until they expose themselves. Meanwhile, document everything and prepare for the nuclear option. Nuclear option? You said your parents have been telling people about their successful investments and retirement planning. What happens when the whole town finds out they're about to lose their house because they've been living off their daughter's income? I drove back to the hotel with a new sense of purpose. If Richard and Patricia wanted to play the reputation game, they'd picked the wrong opponent. They'd forgotten that in small towns, truth has a way of surfacing, and their lies were about to collide with some very inconvenient facts. But first, I had a more immediate problem to solve. I couldn't stay in a hotel indefinitely, and I couldn't go back to my house in Hartford while this was ongoing. I needed a base of operations that would send exactly the right message. I called Maya back. I need you to find me a rental property in Millbrook. Something nice. Something visible. Visible how? I want the whole town to see that the daughter they're calling mentally unstable is doing just fine without her parents' support. Maya found the perfect place within hours. A renovated Victorian mansion on Elm Street, right in the heart of Millbrook's historic district. It had been converted into luxury apartments, and the penthouse unit was available for immediate occupancy. The rent was $4,200 a month, almost exactly what Richard and Patricia were supposed to pay for their Sunset Manor units. I signed the lease that afternoon and arranged for same-day furniture delivery. By evening, I was unpacked and settled into a space that was both beautiful and strategically positioned. Anyone driving through downtown Millbrook would see my car parked outside, would know I was living independently and successfully despite my parents' claims of instability. The apartment was gorgeous. Exposed brick walls, hardwood floors, floor to ceiling, windows that looked out over the town square. But more importantly, it was a statement. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't cowering. I was thriving in the very community my parents were trying to turn against me. That night, I sat by the large windows, watching the sparse evening traffic navigate around the town square. Millbrook looked peaceful under the streetlights. Snow still covering the carefully maintained green space, Christmas decorations still twinkling on the lampposts. It was the kind of scene that belonged on a postcard. Charming New England town. In winter. But I knew that beneath that peaceful surface, the gossip networks were working overtime. People were talking, choosing sides, processing the various narratives being circulated about the Hartwell family drama. Some would believe Richard and Patricia's version. Others would remember the years they'd spent bragging about their financial success while their daughter quietly picked up every check. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Mortgage default notice was filed today. Public record. Henderson at the bank says they've been trying to reach R&P for 3 days. Public record. That meant anyone could access the information, including the local newspaper that covered foreclosure filings. Within days, everyone in Millbrook would know that the Hartwells were facing financial difficulties. The irony was exquisite. While Patricia was making the rounds telling everyone about my mental breakdown and financial irresponsibility, public records were about to expose their own financial disaster. I opened my laptop and began composing an email to Father Michael, Dr. Walsh, Mrs. Carmichael, and everyone else who'd contacted me with concern about my mental state. Dear Name, thank you for your recent email expressing concern about my welfare. I appreciate your thoughtfulness and want to assure you that I'm doing very well. I've recently signed a lease on a beautiful apartment in downtown Millbrook, and I'm looking forward to becoming more involved in our community. My business continues to thrive. We just signed our largest contract to date and will be hiring additional local staff in the coming months. I understand my parents have been sharing their concerns about my well-being with many people in town. While I appreciate that they're motivated by love, I want to assure you that their worries are unfounded. Sometimes family members can have difficulty accepting when adult children establish healthy boundaries. I hope you'll feel free to contact me directly if you have any concerns in the future, rather than relying on secondhand information. Warm regards, Sophia Hartwell. I sent the email to everyone who'd contacted me, then sat back to wait for the response. The next morning, I woke up to find my phone buzzing with notifications. Maya had sent me a link to the Millbrook Gazette's online edition. There, in the legal notices section, was the foreclosure filing for 847 Maple Ridge Drive. But more interesting was the text from Dr. Walsh. Sophia, I received your email and want to apologize. I should have contacted you directly rather than accepting secondhand information. If you ever need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. Similar messages arrived throughout the day. Mrs. Carmichael sent a thoughtful note about how proud she was of my success. The librarian, who apparently also heard Patricia's story, invited me to speak at their monthly business lecture series. The narrative was shifting. People were starting to ask questions about the disconnect between my obvious stability and my parents' claims of crisis. And soon, they'd start asking questions about the even bigger disconnect between the Hartwells' claimed financial success and their very public foreclosure proceedings. My phone rang at noon, Maya's name on the screen. You need to see this, she said without preamble. Patricia just showed up at the Henderson Industries building. She's in the lobby demanding to speak with James Henderson about your deteriorating mental state. I smiled, looking out my window at the peaceful town square below. Call Henderson's assistant and let them know she's there, then call building security and have her removed for trespassing. On what grounds? She has no business relationship with Henderson Industries. She's harassing their employees, and based on her behavior over the past week, she's clearly the one with mental health concerns. Sophia, are you sure about this? Having your own mother arrested might look... Maya, they crossed the line when they started targeting my business. I'm done playing defense. After hanging up, I opened my laptop and began composing a very different kind of email. This one was going directly to the Millbrook Gazette's editor, and it would contain exactly the kind of human interest story that small-town newspapers loved. Successful local businesswoman overcomes family manipulation to build thriving company and give back to community. It was time to control my own narrative. And if Richard and Patricia wanted a public battle, they were about to discover that their daughter was much better at public relations than they'd ever imagined. The Millbrook Gazette published my story on January 8th, and it was everything I'd hoped it would be. The headline read, Local Tech CEO Expands Operations, Plans Major Hiring Initiative. The photo showed me standing in my new downtown apartment, professional but approachable, with the town square visible through the windows behind me. The article was positioned exactly where I'd requested it, right next to the legal notices section that contained the foreclosure filing for 847 Maple Ridge Drive. Reporter Sarah Martinez had done her homework. The piece detailed my company's growth, our recent Fortune 100 contracts, and our plans to hire 20 local residents over the next 6 months. It mentioned my recent move to downtown Millbrook to be closer to community roots and included quotes about my commitment to supporting local businesses and charities. But the real masterpiece was buried in the middle of the article, where Sarah had included a seemingly innocuous paragraph about the challenges faced by successful women in small towns. Hartwell acknowledges that family relationships can become strained when adult children establish financial independence. Sometimes parents have difficulty accepting that their children have grown up and no longer need financial guidance, she noted. It's important to maintain healthy boundaries while still honoring family relationships. To anyone reading casually, it sounded like generic advice about family dynamics. But to anyone who'd been following the gossip about the Hartwell family drama, it was a subtle but devastating counter-narrative. Sophia wasn't the unstable daughter having a breakdown. She was the successful adult establishing appropriate boundaries, with parents who couldn't accept her independence. The response was immediate and polarizing. Maya called at 8 a.m., barely containing her excitement. "Boss, you need to see the reactions." Henderson Industries shared the article on their LinkedIn with a comment about being proud to work with innovative local leaders. "The mayor's office just called asking if you'd be interested in serving on the Economic Development Committee, and 3 other businesses have already inquired about our hiring timeline." But she wasn't done. The really interesting part is what's happening on social media. The article has been shared 47 times already, and the comments are illuminating. I pulled up the Gazette's Facebook page on my laptop. The comment section under my article was a battlefield of small-town politics and gossip. Jennifer Walsh, the doctor's daughter. "So proud to see local women succeeding. Sophia has always been an inspiration." Margaret Kowalski, longtime neighbor. "Some of these comments are ridiculous. I've watched Sophia for years, and she's always been the one helping others. Maybe it's time people asked why successful children sometimes need space from family." But then came the other side. Linda Morrison, country club member. "This is all very convenient timing. Making yourself look successful right when your family is going through difficulties. Some people will do anything for attention." Robert Chen, Richard's golf buddy. "Easy to be successful when you abandon your elderly parents in their time of need. Money isn't everything." The battle lines were drawn, but something interesting was happening in the responses. For every comment criticizing me, 2 or 3 people were pushing back with their own observations. Helen Rodriguez, local restaurant owner. "Linda Morrison, are you serious? Sophia has been a regular customer for years, always polite, always tips well, and last year she quietly paid for the Christmas dinner program at the community center. She never asked for credit or recognition." David Kim, Maya's neighbor. Robert Chen, "I've seen Sophia's parents driving around in a brand new Lexus while claiming financial hardship. Maybe the elderly parents aren't as helpless as they want people to believe." The most damaging comment came from an unexpected source. Janet Miller, who worked at the bank. "Without violating confidentiality, I can say that some people in this town might be surprised to learn where certain investment returns actually come from. Public records are available for anyone interested in facts over gossip." That comment had been liked 37 times and shared twice, which in Millbrook social media terms was basically viral. By noon, I was getting direct messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Former classmates, old neighbors, even some of Richard and Patricia's acquaintances who were starting to ask uncomfortable questions. The message that surprised me most came from Tom Henderson, James Henderson's son and the heir apparent to Henderson Industries. "Sophia, I wanted to reach out personally after the weirdness with your mother yesterday. My dad told me what happened, and I want you to know it doesn't change anything about our business relationship. If anything, the way you've handled this situation has reinforced our confidence in your professionalism. Also, my wife and I have been talking, and we'd love to have you over for dinner sometime. You shouldn't have to go through this alone." I stared at that message for a long time. Tom and his wife Emma were exactly the kind of people my parents had always wanted me to. Marry into, establish local family, inherited wealth, social connections. The irony that they were now offering support while my actual family was trying to destroy me wasn't lost on me. But the real earthquake hit at 2:30 p.m. when Maya called with news that changed everything. Sophia, you're not going to believe this. Remember Janet Miller's comment about public records? Well, someone took her advice. 3 different people have requested the property records for your parents' house, and 2 of them work for the Gazette. My heart started pounding. What are they going to find? Everything. The mortgage history, the payment records, the fact that payments have been coming from Hartwell Holdings for the past 8 years. It's all public record if you know where to look. I sat down heavily in my desk chair, looking out at the town square, where a few people were walking their dogs in the winter sunshine. This was it. The moment when the careful facade Richard and Patricia had constructed would crumble completely. There's more, Maya continued. Someone also requested the business registration records for Sunset Manor. Once they connect Hartwell Holdings to your parents' retirement home. She didn't need to finish. Once the connection became public, everyone would understand the full scope of what had happened. The successful parents who'd kicked out their irresponsible daughter were actually entirely dependent on that daughter's income, and were about to move into a retirement home she owned. My phone started ringing almost immediately. Sarah Martinez. From the Gazette. Sophia, I need to ask you about some property records that have come to light. Are you available for a follow-up interview? I agreed to meet her at 4 p.m. at the coffee shop on Main Street. If this story was going to come out, and it clearly was, I wanted to control how it was told. The coffee shop was busier than usual for a Tuesday afternoon, and I recognized several faces from social media comments. Word was already spreading that something big was about to break in the Hartwell family saga. Sarah arrived exactly on time, carrying a folder that looked ominously thick. She ordered a latte and sat across from me, her expression professional but sympathetic. Sophia, I've been reviewing public records following up on some reader inquiries about your family situation. I want to give you the opportunity to comment before we publish anything. What did you find? Mortgage payment records showing that payments for 847 Maple Ridge Drive have been coming from Hartwell Holdings since 2016. Property registration showing that Sunset Manor is owned by the same company. Business records showing that you are the sole owner of Hartwell Holdings. She paused, letting the implications settle. I also found bank records, public because of the foreclosure proceedings, showing regular transfers from Hartwell Holdings to Richard and Patricia Hartwell's personal accounts, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 8 years. Took a sip of my coffee, buying time to think. The truth was about to come out whether I participated or not. The question was whether I wanted to shape the narrative or let others define it. What exactly are you planning to publish? The facts. Your parents have been financially dependent on your income while publicly claiming financial independence. They kicked you out of a house you've been paying for. They're about to move into a retirement home you own. And they've been telling people you're mentally unstable while they themselves are facing foreclosure. She leaned forward slightly. Sophia, this is a story about financial abuse and manipulation. Your parents have been taking credit for your success while undermining your character. People deserve to know the truth. I thought about the past 2 weeks. The voicemails, the fake medical emergency, the campaign to destroy my reputation, Patricia showing up at my client's office. They'd forced this moment by refusing to accept boundaries and escalating to public destruction. Okay, I said finally. Let's tell the truth. The interview lasted 90 minutes. I showed Sarah bank records, transfer documentation, emails between my parents and Sunset Manor management, even recordings of some of the voicemails they'd left me. I walked her through 8 years of financial support, the gradual escalation of their dependence, and the events of Christmas Eve that had triggered my decision to establish boundaries. Sarah was thorough and professional, asking hard questions about my motivations and methods. Some people might say you're being vindictive. How do you respond to that? I'd say that financial abuse doesn't become acceptable just because it comes from family members. I spent 8 years enabling people who saw my generosity as weakness and my success as their entitlement. The moment I established boundaries, they tried to destroy my reputation and my business. That's not family behavior. That's predatory behavior. What do you want people to understand about your situation? That adult children are not required to fund their parents' lifestyle choices. That generosity should be appreciated, not expected. And that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people who are using you is to stop enabling their dysfunction. As we were wrapping up, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We know what you're doing. This won't end well for you." I showed the message to Sarah, who photographed it immediately. "Is this typical of the communications you've been receiving?" "Unfortunately, yes." She made a note in her file. "This will be in tomorrow's edition. Are you prepared for the reaction?" I looked around the coffee shop, noticing how several conversations had stopped when people saw me talking to the reporter. By tomorrow night, everyone in Millbrook would know the complete truth about the Hartwell family dynamics. "I've been preparing for this reaction my entire life," I said. "I just didn't know it." After Sarah left, I sat alone in the coffee shop for another hour, watching the early winter darkness settle over the town square. Tomorrow would change everything. There would be no going back, no pretending that our family dysfunction was private anymore. Richard and Patricia's reputation would be destroyed, their social standing obliterated, their financial dependence exposed for everyone to see. But as I walked back to my apartment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the lightness that comes with telling the truth. For 34 years, I'd been complicit in maintaining their facade. Tomorrow, I would finally be free of that burden. The truth was about to set me free. What it did to them was their own responsibility. The Millbrook Gazette's follow-up article hit the internet at 6 a.m. on January 9th, and by 6:15 my phone was ringing nonstop. The headline was devastating in its simplicity. "Local family's financial deception exposed. Daughter reveals years of secret support." Sarah Martinez had crafted a masterpiece of investigative journalism. The article laid out 8 years of financial manipulation in excruciating detail, complete with documentation, bank records, and direct quotes from my interview. But the most damaging element was the timeline she'd constructed, showing how Richard and Patricia's public statements about their financial success directly contradicted the private reality of their dependence on my income. The article included a sidebar titled, "The Numbers Don't Lie," that broke down the transfers. Monthly mortgage assistance, $2,147 insurance and tax support, 1,020 emergency transfers, 47,836 over 8 years total documented support, 421,463. But the real bombshell was the revelation about Sunset Manor. Sarah had connected all the dots, showing that Richard and Patricia were planning to move into a retirement community owned by the daughter they'd publicly criticized and privately expelled. The article included a quote from the original Sunset Manor lease application, where Patricia had described their substantial investment income and strong family values. I was still reading the online comments when Maya burst into my apartment at 7:30 a.m., laptop in hand and coffee in both hands. "Boss, you need to see this. The article has been shared over 300 times already, and it's trending on the Connecticut news aggregate sites. But that's not the big news." She set her laptop on my dining table, where a legal document was already displayed on screen. "Richard filed a lawsuit against you at 6:45 this morning. He's claiming defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and breach of fiduciary duty." I stared at the document, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. Breach of fiduciary duty? What fiduciary duty? He's claiming that by managing their finances for 8 years, you created a legal obligation to continue supporting them indefinitely. His lawyer is arguing that you entered into an implied contract by providing consistent financial assistance. The legal strategy was both desperate and revealing. By claiming I had a fiduciary duty to support them, Richard was inadvertently admitting the full extent of their financial dependence. He was also implicitly acknowledging that I had been managing their finances, which contradicted every statement they'd made about their independent financial planning. Who's representing him? Maya pulled up another tab. Marcus Webb from Webb and Associates. He specializes in elder law and has a reputation for taking creative approaches to family disputes. Marcus Webb. I knew that name. He'd been involved in several high-profile cases where adult children had been sued by parents seeking ongoing financial support. His strategy usually involved portraying successful children as ungrateful offspring, abandoning their elderly parents. In time of need. We need Margaret Chen on the phone immediately, I said. And Maya, start documenting every communication we've had about this situation. If they want to make this a legal battle, we're going to bury them in evidence, Margaret answered on the second ring. Sophia, I saw the article. Beautifully executed. I assume they've responded with legal action? Filed this morning. Defamation, emotional distress, and breach of fiduciary duty. Fiduciary duty? Margaret laughed. That's actually good news for us. By claiming you had a duty to support them, they're admitting the relationship was entirely one-sided. No fiduciary relationship exists without mutual obligations and disclosed terms. What's our response strategy? Countersue immediately. Financial elder abuse, fraud, defamation, and intentional interference with business relationships. The fact that they called your clients gives us a strong case for business interference. And Sophia, their lawyer, made a critical error by filing so quickly after the article. It looks reactive and desperate. By 10 a.m., I was sitting in Margaret's office reviewing our countersuit strategy. The document she'd prepared was comprehensive and devastating. We were seeking damages for 8 years of financial manipulation, compensation for business interference, and legal fees. But more importantly, we were demanding a full accounting of how they'd used the money I'd provided. Here's the beautiful part, Margaret explained, pointing to Section 12 of our filing. We're requesting that the court appoint a forensic accountant to trace every dollar you transferred to their accounts. If they spent your money on luxury items while claiming poverty, it strengthens our fraud case exponentially. What about the Sunset Manor situation? That's our ace in the hole. Their lease application contains sworn statements about their income sources that we can now prove were false. That's not just breach of contract. It's perjury if they signed those documents, under oath. The afternoon brought a parade of supporters and gawkers to my downtown apartment. Tom and Emma Henderson stopped by with a bottle of wine and dinner from the Italian restaurant on Main Street. We wanted you to know you're not going through this alone, Emma said, giving me a fierce hug. What they did to you is unconscionable. Dr. Walsh called to apologize formally for her earlier email. I should have known better than to accept secondhand information about a patient's welfare. Your parents were very convincing, but reading the facts in black and white makes their manipulation obvious. Even Father Michael reached out, though his message was more complex. Sophia, I've been praying about your family situation since reading today's article. While I still believe in the power of forgiveness, I also recognize that some behaviors require consequences before healing can begin. Your parents' actions were not those of loving family members. But the most significant call came at 4 p.m. from James Henderson himself. Sophia, I wanted to touch base about the legal situation. If you need character witnesses or business references for your case, Henderson Industries will provide whatever support you require. What your parents did, trying to sabotage your business relationships is absolutely unacceptable. I appreciate that, James. It means more than you know. There's something else. I've been thinking about our conversation regarding your expansion plans. Given everything that's happened, Henderson Industries would like to offer you a 5-year exclusive contract for all our cybersecurity needs. Consider it our way of demonstrating confidence in your company's stability and professionalism." I had to sit down. The contract he was offering would triple my annual revenue and establish my company as the premier cybersecurity firm in Central Connecticut. It was exactly the kind of breakthrough that usually took years to achieve. "James, that's incredibly generous, but I don't want you to feel obligated." "This isn't charity, Sophia. This is business. Your parents' behavior has inadvertently highlighted your professionalism and integrity. The way you've handled this situation, documenting everything, responding through proper legal channels, maintaining your business operations, despite personal attacks, that's exactly the kind of character we want in our long-term partners." As the day wore on, the public support became overwhelming. The Gazette's website crashed twice from traffic volume. My article had been picked up by 3 regional news outlets and was being discussed on Connecticut business forums. The mayor's office called to ask if I'd consider serving on the town's economic development board, but the most meaningful response came in an email from a woman named Caroline Stevens, whom I didn't recognize. "Dear Ms. Hartwell, I read your story in today's Gazette, and I wanted to thank you for speaking out. I've been financially supporting my parents for 12 years, while they criticize every aspect of my life and take credit for their comfortable retirement. Reading about your experience gave me the courage to finally establish boundaries. Sometimes, we need to see someone else's courage to find our own." That email was followed by 6 others from people in similar situations. Adult children who'd been funding parents who showed no appreciation. Siblings who'd been carrying family financial burdens while being criticized as selfish or irresponsible. The article had apparently struck a nerve that extended far beyond Millbrook. But at 6 p.m., the tone shifted dramatically when Maya called with news that changed everything. "Sophia, you need to get down here immediately. Richard and Patricia are at the Sunset Manor Management Office with their lawyer, demanding immediate access to their units." "What do you mean, demanding access?" "They're claiming that since they have a signed lease, the property owner has no right to delay their move-in regardless of ongoing legal disputes. Webb is threatening to file for emergency injunctive relief if we don't honor the original lease terms immediately." I grabbed my coat and keys. This was the moment I'd been anticipating but dreading. The face-to-face confrontation where all pretenses would finally be stripped away. The drive to Sunset Manor took 12 minutes, and I spent every one of them preparing for what would likely be the final battle in this war. Richard and Patricia had chosen to make this public, legal, and ugly. Now they'd have to live with the consequences. The management office was in chaos when I arrived. Richard was red-faced and shouting at the property manager, a composed woman named Linda Martinez, who was clearly in over her head. Patricia sat in a corner chair looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen her, while Marcus Webb, a thin man in an expensive suit, was making notes on a legal pad. The conversation stopped the moment I walked in. "Hello, Richard." "Patricia." I kept my voice level and professional. "Mr. Webb, I assume. I'm Sophia Hartwell." Webb stood and extended his hand, which I shook briefly. "Ms. Hartwell, I represent Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell in this unfortunate family dispute." "It's not a family dispute," I replied calmly. "It's a business matter. Your clients signed a lease agreement with false financial information. They're currently in default on multiple financial obligations, and they've engaged in a campaign of harassment against my business interests." "Now see here," Richard started, but Webb cut him off with a raised hand. "Ms. Hartwell, my clients have a valid lease agreement for units 247 and 248. The personal relationship between you and your parents doesn't give you the right to violate that contract." I turned to Linda Martinez. "Could you please pull up the lease application for Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell?" Linda quickly accessed the file on her computer. "Here it is. Could you read the section about income verification?" Linda cleared her throat. All applicants must provide accurate information about income sources. Misrepresentation of financial status may result in immediate lease termination. I looked at Webb. Your clients claimed their income came from investment returns and retirement distributions. Public records now show that this income actually came from regular transfers from my company. That's textbook misrepresentation. That's a technicality, Webb began. It's fraud, I interrupted. They signed legal documents with false information. But more importantly, their current financial situation makes it impossible for them to meet their lease obligations. Patricia finally spoke, her voice small and shaky. Sophia, please, we just need somewhere to live. For a moment, looking at my mother's frightened face, I felt the familiar tug of guilt and responsibility. This was the woman who'd raised me, who'd packed my school lunches and driven me to soccer practice. But then I remembered the suitcase on Christmas Eve, the fake medical emergency, the attempts to destroy my business. You do need somewhere to live, I agreed. But it won't be in a luxury retirement community that you can't afford, and it won't be subsidized by the daughter you discarded, Richard exploded. You spiteful little… Enough. My voice cut through his rage like a blade. Mr. Webb, your clients have exactly 24 hours to remove their belongings from the premises they've been using for storage. After that, those items will be considered abandoned property. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Richard? The next time you want to discuss our relationship, you can do it through your lawyer. This family conversation is officially over. The last thing I heard as I walked out was Patricia's quiet sobbing and Webb's urgent whispers about damage control. Outside in the parking lot, I sat in my car for a long moment, hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. It was done. The nuclear option had been deployed, the bridges had been burned, and there was no going back. But as I drove home through the winter darkness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The peace that comes with finally, completely, choosing yourself over people who don't value you. Tomorrow would bring legal battles, media attention, and probably more attempts at manipulation. But tonight, for the first time since Christmas Eve, I was truly free. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of my expanded office space, looking out at 23 employees, 18 of them new hires since January. The Henderson Industries contract had been just the beginning. Word had spread through Connecticut's business community about the cybersecurity firm that had remained professional and reliable, even while navigating a very public family crisis. Apparently, crisis management skills translated directly into client confidence. Maya walked into the conference room carrying 2 cups of coffee and the morning mail. The final settlement documents came through, she said, handing me an envelope with the law firm's letterhead. It's over. I opened the envelope and scanned the contents. After 4 months of legal warfare, Richard and Patricia had finally accepted a settlement that absolved me of all financial responsibility while requiring them to pay damages for business interference. More importantly, they'd agreed to a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that prevented them from making any further public statements about our relationship. The settlement also included something I'd insisted upon despite Margaret's advice. A fund that would pay for basic housing assistance for them for 2 years, administered through a third-party agency. Not luxury retirement living, but a modest apartment in senior housing that would keep them fed and sheltered while they figured out their actual financial situation. How do you feel? Maya asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. I thought about it for a moment, watching the activity in the main office through the conference room's glass walls. Young professionals working on projects that would protect major corporations from cyber threats. Paychecks being earned by people who'd never know that their jobs existed because one woman had finally stopped enabling financial abusers. Free, I said finally. For the first time in my adult life, completely free. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first few months had been a constant battle between relief and guilt, between the exhilaration of independence and the deeply ingrained need to fix other people's problems. Therapy had helped, something I'd finally had time and emotional bandwidth for, once I wasn't managing 3 people's lives. Dr. Rebecca Chen, no relation to my lawyer Margaret, had been instrumental in helping me understand the psychology of financial abuse and enabling relationships. You weren't just giving them money, she'd explained during one of our sessions. You were giving them the ability to maintain a false self-image while avoiding the consequences of their choices. That's not love, that's enabling dysfunction. The community reaction had been swift and decisive. Within weeks of the Gazette's exposé, Richard and Patricia had become social pariahs in Millbrook. The country club had quietly suggested they might be more comfortable elsewhere. Their church had stopped including them in social events. Even their closest friends had distanced themselves once the extent of their deception became clear. But the most satisfying vindication came from an unexpected source. In March, the Connecticut Business Journal had featured my company in a cover story about successful women entrepreneurs. The article included a sidebar about family relationships and business success that quoted several other businesswomen who'd experienced similar manipulation from family members. The assumption that successful children owe indefinite financial support to parents is both legally and morally questionable, Dr. Patricia Williams, a family psychology expert at Yale, had told the magazine. Adult children have no obligation to fund lifestyles their parents cannot afford, especially when that support comes with emotional manipulation and criticism. The article had generated significant discussion in business and psychology circles, with several universities reaching out to ask if I'd speak about family financial boundaries. I'd given 3 lectures in the past 2 months, always to packed auditoriums filled with people who understood exactly what I'd experienced. The speaking engagements had led to another unexpected opportunity. Harvard Business School had invited me to teach a seminar on crisis management and family business dynamics. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter who'd been criticized for her life choices was now being asked to share her expertise at one of the world's most prestigious institutions. But the personal transformation had been even more profound than the professional success. For the first time in years, I was dating. Really dating. Not just accepting occasional dinners with men who met my parents' approval criteria. David Reyes, a fellow entrepreneur who'd moved to Connecticut to start a sustainable energy company, had asked me out after hearing me speak at a business conference in Hartford. What attracted me wasn't your success, he'd told me on our 3rd date. It was your clarity about boundaries. I've never met anyone who's so clear about what they will and won't accept from people. We'd been together for 2 months now, and the relationship felt different from anything I'd experienced before. There was no performance anxiety, no constant worry about whether I was being good enough or successful enough or impressive enough. David liked me for who I was, not what I could provide. My living situation had stabilized too. I'd purchased a house in the historic district, a beautiful 1920s colonial that I'd renovated to my exact specifications. The monthly payment was less than what I'd been spending on my parents' expenses, and for the first time in my life, I was building equity in something that actually belonged to me. The house had become my sanctuary, but it had also become a symbol of something larger. When local magazine Connecticut Living had featured it in their historic renovations spread, the article had included a quote that still gave me chills. Sometimes the most beautiful transformations happen when we stop trying to fix other people's foundations and start building our own. On July 4th, I'd hosted a barbecue for my employees and their families. Watching children play in my backyard while their parents relaxed on furniture I'd chosen, in a space I'd created, with food I'd bought using money that actually belonged. To me, it had been a moment of pure contentment that I'd never thought possible. The only shadow in my new life was the complete absence of my parents. We hadn't spoken since that day at Sunset Manor, and I'd heard through the Millbrook gossip network that they'd moved to a senior housing complex in Waterbury, about 40 miles away. According to my lawyer, they were receiving the assistance payments from the settlement fund, which covered their basic living expenses, but little else. Sometimes, usually late at night, I wondered if I'd been too harsh, if there had been some middle ground between enabling their dysfunction and cutting them off completely. Dr. Chen had addressed this during our sessions. Sophia, you gave them 8 years and over $400,000 to figure out how to treat you with respect. They chose manipulation and exploitation instead. The consequences they're experiencing now are the natural result of their choices, not your actions. She was right, but the guilt occasionally still surfaced. Until I remembered the suitcase on Christmas Eve, the fake medical emergency, the attempts to destroy my business. Then the guilt would fade, replaced by gratitude for my own strength in choosing myself over people who didn't value me. The biggest vindication came in August, when I received an unexpected letter forwarded through my lawyer's office. It was from Patricia, written in her careful handwriting on plain paper, no more monogrammed stationery. Sophia, it read, I want you to know that your father and I are doing well in our new situation. We've made friends here, and we're learning to live within our actual means. It's harder than we expected, but we're managing. I won't apologize for loving you or wanting you in our lives, but I can apologize for the way we took your help for granted and the way we treated you when you tried to establish boundaries. We were wrong to kick you out on Christmas Eve. We were wrong to try to damage your business. We were wrong to expect your support without offering our respect. I don't expect you to forgive us or resume a relationship. I understand that trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild. But I wanted you to know that we're learning to take responsibility for our own lives, just like you always encouraged us to do. I hope you're happy. You deserve happiness, and you deserve to be valued for who you are, not what you can provide. Love, Mom. I'd read that letter a dozen times, feeling a complex mixture of sadness, relief, and something that might eventually become forgiveness. Not reconciliation, too much damage had been done for that, but perhaps, someday, a kind of peace. Maya appeared in my office doorway, interrupting my reflection. The car's here for your Harvard trip. You ready for this? I looked around my office, the awards on the walls, the photos of company achievements, the view of downtown Millbrook where I'd built a life entirely of my own choosing. In 2 hours, I'd be speaking to a room full of MBA students about crisis, management and family dynamics, sharing lessons learned from the most painful period of my life. More than ready, I said, grabbing my briefcase and the notes for my presentation. As we walked toward the elevator, Maya asked the question she'd been asking for months. Any regrets? I thought about it as we descended to the parking garage. Regrets about the lost family relationships? About the public nature of our breakdown? About the pain and chaos of those winter months? Just one, I said as we reached the car. I regret waiting so long to choose myself. The drive to Cambridge took 2 hours, giving me time to review my presentation notes and think about the message I wanted to convey to the next generation of business leaders. The lecture was titled, Boundaries and Business, When Personal Relationships Threaten Professional Success. But really, it was about something much simpler and more fundamental, the right to be valued for who you are rather than what you can provide. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Knock them dead at Harvard, then come home to me. Dinner will be waiting. Home. For the first time in my life, that word didn't come with conditions or expectations or the need to earn my place. It was simply a place where I was loved for exactly who I was. I smiled and typed back, on my way, home. The Massachusetts landscape rolled past the car windows, autumn just beginning to touch the leaves with gold and red. In a few hours, I'd be standing in front of some of the brightest business minds in the country, sharing the story of how losing my family had helped me find myself. But first, I'd tell them about Christmas Eve, about a suitcase and a retirement, home and the moment I realized that love without respect isn't love at all. I'd tell them about the difference between helping people and enabling them, about the courage required to enforce boundaries with people who've taught you that your worth is tied to your usefulness. Most importantly, I'd tell them what I'd learned in the months since that terrible Christmas, that you can't fix broken people by breaking yourself, that family isn't defined by blood but by behavior, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who don't know how to love you back. The car pulled into Harvard's campus as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the historic buildings. Students hurried between classes, their faces bright with possibility and ambition. In a few years, some of them would face their own moments of truth with family members who saw their success as opportunity rather than achievement. I hoped my story would help them choose themselves sooner than I had. As I walked toward the lecture hall, I thought about the woman who'd stood in that driveway 6 months ago, holding a suitcase and believing she was losing everything. She couldn't have imagined that losing her family would lead to finding herself, that enforcing boundaries would create freedom, that choosing herself would finally allow her to build a life worth living. But sometimes the best transformations happen when we stop trying to hold together things that were never meant to last and start building something entirely new. Tonight, I'd teach Harvard students about crisis management and family dynamics. Tomorrow, I'd go home to a man who loved me without conditions, to a business that thrived on my authentic leadership, to a life I'd built stone by stone with my own hands. And for the first time in 34 years, I'd go to sleep knowing that I was exactly where I belonged, in a life of my own choosing, surrounded by people who saw my worth, free from the exhausting work of trying to earn love from people who confused generosity with weakness. The girl who'd believed family meant home had been wrong. Family wasn't a place, it was a feeling, and I'd finally found mine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.